So we're going to be over in the air park for the next 90 minutes. And there is no water or toilet facilities over there, so I do suggest that if you need to go to the toilet, go now or grab a drink bottle just in case you might get thirsty out there. So I'm just going to do a quick roll call with one name of each of our booking groups. Just give me a way when you hear your name. We have Sue Pers. Yep. Sammy. Sorry. I had a purpose of building at my school, high school. It's just natural now to say that. Sammy Jones. Yep. Tom Tyrrell. Yep. Stephen English Ellis. Yep. I'm just going to say one name here. Ranjit Jiva. Please tell me I got that somewhat right.
Somewhere there.
Brian Harvey. Yep. Madison Fletcher.
Yep.
Margaret Skells. Yep. Dave Thompson.
Yeah.
Yep. Ange Holloway. Yep. Tracy Pickett. Bob Sims. And Nick Burley. Yep. Radio. So when we checked in, we should all have been given a boarding pass. What we're going to do with that pass is we take a look, there's a small perforated line. If you could tear down that line, I'll take the smaller end of the ticket stub off you as we head into the air park. You can keep the longer end as a bit of a souvenir, as you would if you were going on a real flight. So we're going to do our best with social distancing whilst we're out in the air park. So obviously when we're out of the planes, it's all good, it's all fine, but when we get into them, there's a few areas that we have to split the group up, and I'll just let you know when that is, just to maintain as much distancing as we can. So would you all like to follow me over to the air park, please? welcome everybody to our air park. Now this roof is only newly constructed. We put it up about 2 years ago to protect our planes from abnormally harsh long reach weather. That's because our 747's been sitting here nearly 20 years, our 707 nearly 15, so we do try and preserve the exterior of them for as long as we can. We also do try and preserve the interior of the plane, so when we're going through them, especially our 747 and our 707, I do ask that you don't sit on any of the seats, open any of the cupboards, etc, etc, because they are still museum artefacts and we're trying to look after them for as long as we can. So over the next 90 minutes we'll be going through, around and underneath our 747, through our Super Constellation, through our 707, and I'll tell you the story of our DC-3. So during this time I probably will not stop talking about 80% of it, so if someone does have a question, feel free to yell it at me, I won't get offended. So we'll start over here with our DC-3. So these planes were first made by the Douglas Commercial Aircraft Company from Santa Monica, California in 1935, and they started producing them commercially for airlines in 1936, where they made 607 of them. During their time, they were the height of luxury in air travel. They carried 21 passengers in a non-air pressurised cabin. They were shaky, rattly, noisy, but they were efficient and they got the job done. They were the first plane that were economical enough for airlines to be able to make a profit without their government airmail assistance. So during World War II, they became a workhorse for the Allies. Depending on who you were with, they were known as either C-47s or Dakotas. Over 11,000 of them were made, and they were used to carry everything you can think of: troops, jeeps, animals, cargo, medical supplies, food, equipment. The list goes on. The way you can tell a plane that started its life as a military plane compared to a DC-3, the passenger version, is these big double cargo doors here. So the reason the doors were so wide is they could drive a jeep up and in and transport them around by air. This plane started its life in 1944 with the United States Army Air Force before being transferred to the Australian Air Force 1 month later. Qantas got its first DC-3 in 1944, and after the war in 1948 they acquired this one and used it on their Sydney to New Guinea services. They continued to use it right up until 1964 when it went on to TAA, Trans-Australia Airlines. They used it for another decade before it was then given to Air New Guinea. As part of the plan to make Papua New Guinea independent in 1975, they wanted to set them up with their own airline. They continued to use it for just over a decade, but they sold it on to a Cairns company called Bush Pilot Airways, nicknamed the Bushies. They used it to carry passengers around central and far north Queensland until they shut down in the early 1990s. It then went through 2 skydiving companies in 2 years. They also shut down. This plane does not have a good record of keeping businesses alive. So it was eventually purchased by a gentleman from Sydney by the name of Laurie McIver. Laurie wanted to turn this into a sightseeing vessel for tourists over his hometown of Sydney. It took its last flight into the Hoxton Park Aerodrome in 1993. Hoxton Park is now an industrial estate. Unfortunately for Laurie, in 1995 he passed away in an accident, and his wife sold it on a few years later to a gentleman from Hobart called John Williams. Now John bought this plane sight unseen. Buying a lot of things sight unseen isn't the best idea, yet alone a 40-year-old military aircraft that hasn't flown in 4 years. Because by the time he got up to it, the wingtips were rusted out, the tail was rusted out, the billions rusted out. He was unfixable, therefore unflyable. Unlucky for John, but lucky for us, because in 2004 he donated this plane to our museum, and in March 2005 it drove up from Sydney on the back of a lowlider. We took the wings off, put them down, strapped the belly on top, drove her up. We then had a public working bee in 2007 to put it back together as we see here today, as through Qantas Empire Airways was using it in the 1940s and 50s. So these planes were first made in 1935. Our 747s behind you. They were first made in 1969. It's an incredible jump in only 35 years of aviation. So Qantas bought their first 747 79. That's why she's called the City of Bunbury, because 79 was Western Australia's 150th birthday, and it was the year that Bunbury was declared a city. So fresh off the factory floor, Boeing gave these planes a lifespan of 20,000 takeoff and landings. Qantas knocked that back to 19,000. By the early 2000s, this plane was starting to come to the end of its life, and airlines normally had a couple of options of what to do with it. They could sell it on for spare parts of scrap metal and aluminium, worth about $5.5 million to the airline. For the first time ever, Qantas took another option, and they donated us a plane. On the 16th of November 2002, the 82nd birthday of Qantas, this plane landed out here on our long-reach runway with flight number 18,020. And as we can see, our plane is big. Nose to tail, 70 metres long. Wingtip to wingtip, 60 metres wide. The tail is 6 stories high at the top, and the flight deck is 3. That also makes it the tallest publicly accessible structure in Longreach. We're not a big town. So right up at the nose of the plane, there's a fiberglass dome with the weather radar dish inside. It's known as the radome. It'll show the weather forecast in front of the pilots and tell them where the heavy clouds or heavy rainfall is so they can avoid it or fly over it. Just helps keep our flights a little bit safer and a little bit more comfortable. Just behind it where that seam line is the start of our pressurisation tank. It runs from the nose of the plane, 63.5 metres to the end of our passenger cabin, above the flight deck and underneath the cargo bays. That's the part that keeps us alive in flight. It's also the part that wears out. So when it pressurises, it expands 4 centimetres. All the rivets inside, there's 1 million rivets in there. They take the stress, that's what wears out. 20,000 times, it's busted, it's done. So I know not many of us actually listen properly to those pre-flight safety briefings we get, but if you are going to remember one thing, please let it be this. If you're ever cruising along at altitude and your oxygen mask drops down in front of you, please do what they say and put yours on before others. That's because at 35,000 feet our cruising altitude, there's only enough oxygen in the air to stay conscious for 7 seconds. Put yours on before others, help keep everyone safe. So just behind it there's a blanked off window. That is our business class coat cupboard. So if you're a lucky enough sir or ma'am, you got to fly in business class, you didn't have to shove your good coat up in your suitcase and put it in the cargo bays like the rest of us in economy. You just got to take it on the flight with you and access it whenever you needed it. Just behind it there's 2 probes sticking off the side of our plane. They're called pitot tubes, and they essentially act like the speedo system for our aircraft. So they've got hollow ends, and as we're moving along, we're flying along, air pressure comes inside, builds up, pushes up an instrument in the cockpit, tells pilots how fast they're flying. They're heated and cleaned before every flight because they get frozen up at our altitude, they get bugs and insects inside, and funnily enough, pilots do like to know how fast they're going. Our smaller planes, like we normally see on our long-reach runway, have 1 on each side. These big girls have 2 for safety, 4 in total, just as backup systems. Just behind it, there's a small probe that looks like a hockey stick. That is our angle of attack vane, and it monitors what angle we're flying on. So in cruising, we want to be 10 to 12 degrees upright ideally. You start to get above 15 to 16, they'll get an alarm in their cockpit and their flight controls will start rattling like we see on those air crash movies. You know, mayday, mayday, we're going down. That's because if you get above 16, there's not enough airflow going over the wing to keep us stable, and they're at the risk of having what's called a stall, where they're not getting enough power through, potentially causing a crash. They let us know earlier rather than later, so we try to avoid doing that as much as possible. If you follow me underneath the belly, please. If you guys could just come around this way so I'm not shouting into the wind the whole time. $54,000. here. So it might look very complex, but essentially all it's saying is approach from the southwest, and if you're 20 nautical miles away from the airport, you want to be at 10,000 feet, you then want to drop down to 8 when you're 15. That's because coming into Cairns is like going down a set of stairs because of the mountain ranges around it. It just gives us that safe clearance altitude. So follow me along the belly of it. So we all see that long probe right on the end of our wingtip. That is our high frequency radio aerial, and as I said, it's what we use for our long range communication. So we're flying over an ocean or a desert, or even a remote part of the country like Australia, we would have been using our high frequency radio. More modern planes, you won't see that anymore, so high frequency has just been replaced by satellite communication instead. Just behind it there's another small probe. That is our fuel dump valve. And it's used in the case of absolute emergencies for the pilots to be able to lose weight. That's because from empty, these planes take on 206,000 litres of aviation fuel, that's practically kerosene, costing an airline about $500,000 to fill up. It's stored in 11 fuel tanks, 5 in each wing where the dark grey area is above us, and 1 in the belly. Our maximum takeoff weight is 377 tonne, maximum landing weight is 286. Fair difference there. If there's an emergency early on in the flight, the pilots have to lose weight to be able to get back down safely. They can't dump an engine, they can't dump cargo, and thankfully for us, they can't throw a few passengers out. We've all flown next to someone who wish they could though. They got to dump their really, really expensive fuel. So combined between our two wingtips, we can go through 75 tonnes of fuel in half an hour, allowing us to get back down on the ground in about 45 minutes. And when they do dump our fuel, it's a very obvious procedure. We'll have 2 white vapour trails coming out behind our wingtips. If you want to look it up to see, just Google 747 fuel dump, there's literally hundreds of videos, because funnily enough, people see fuel spraying out the back of the plane, they get a little bit concerned. On the bottom of our wings here we have these rounded bits. They're called canoes, and they're what control the flaps on our wing. So they've just got one big screw inside each one to move it all around. So the way we've got our wings set up at the moment, it's a short, thin wing for fast flights and cruising speed. On takeoff, our flaps extend by 25% to give us 90% more lift, and on landing they come out and down to help assist with drag. I do just have a demonstration here of how the flaps work in case that didn't make that much sense. Now our engines. There's 4 engines on board this plane, 2 on each wing. They're all Rolls-Royce RB211 engines, produce 54,000 pounds of thrust each, weigh 6.5 tonne, and they're held on with 6 attachment bolts that are this long. And there is a safety reason behind that, and you learn very quickly in this tour that everything in aviation is designed for our worst case scenarios. So in the event of an emergency when our landing gears don't go down, the engineer will go down into his hatch and try wind them down manually. If that doesn't work, or for some reason gravity didn't want to work that day, it's time for a belly landing. All our planes are designed to do a belly landing in a worst case scenario. So we notice that all our engines hang lower than the belly of the plane. That's because our pilots will come down and nudge those engines on the ground. Our 6 bolts will snap, and momentum will take the engines back up over the top of our wing, being held on by steel attachment cables so they don't go rolling away into no man's land. Well, a panicking passengers coming out the front and each side, fuel spraying everywhere. The last thing we also want to have to contend with is a 6.5 tonne engine catching fire and rolling at us. This helps keep them out of our way. You might be looking at me going, Hamish, can you count? There's a 3rd engine on this wing. I can always tell the people who do by looking in their eyes. That is how we carry a spare engine. So not for this plane, but if there's a flight that has an engine failure on the way over to an airport, they'll take the inner workings and the propellers out, put them in the belly. Strap on the outside engine cowling as you see there. It weighs 3.5 tonnes. Held on by 3 attachment bolts this time, and it doesn't affect the centre of gravity of our aircraft. 3.5 tonne, that close to the centre over 250, doesn't make that much of a difference. In case you don't believe me, I do have an early 300 series in flight here carrying a spare engine on its left wing. More modern planes like our big Airbuses, you won't see this anymore. They can just fit one in the belly. No need to carry it. Now, in the late 70s and early 80s, airlines loved to take photos of their flight crews and flight hostesses standing inside our 747 engines as part of our marketing campaigns to show how big and sturdy they were in comparison to our 707 engines. And there's now only 2 places in the world that we can legally stand in a 747 jet engine. The first is in the South African Airlines Museum all the way over in Transvaal. The other one is in little old Longreach. So if you follow me over to our engine, please. Bit of a pose to show how big they really were. I'm done. That's enough photos. So you all have your own opportunity to come up and stand in our engines and have your own photo if you wish. Just before we do, we have a few quick safety things to go through. Just watch out for a low handrails coming up and down. If you do need something to hold on to, that's what our outside engine cowling's for. As we step up, watch out, there's a bit bigger step than you think. I'm used to stepping up every day, so it's very natural for me now. When we are up in here, try not to stand too far back, because the cowling does cast a fair bit of a shadow. Take a step forward, a lot better photo for us. Also, if you need something to balance on, that's what this big gold cone in the centre's for. Just please don't run into it. I have before, and it doesn't tickle your kidneys. We'll come up one side, down the other. I'll be standing over there with our museum camera. Feel free to take your own on your own devices as well. the other thing is we don't have a weight limit up here. The most people I've ever had in our engine is 12 adults or 30 kids, so it's fine.